order. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Roberts.
Here.
Commissioner Huntosh.
Here.
Commissioner Husnick.
Here.
Commissioner Finneman. Commissioner Lorge.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
And President Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. Being our first meeting of the year, we do have an agenda item for election of officers. However, I would like to propose that we remove that agenda item until our next EDA meeting. We do have we have EDA member appointments on tonight's city council meeting, and so would like us to move the election of officers to the next meeting. So if we could remove that, and then are there any other suggested changes to the agenda tonight?
I could add one item. That would be some discussion of a potential turn back of Lake Street or Highway 61.
Very good. So two changes to the agenda tonight. One is the election, removing the election of officers until our next meeting, and then to add a discussion item related to Highway 61 turn back. With those two changes, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion, and we'll take a second from Member Huntosh. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And our agenda is approved. Moving on to our next item is item 6, which is to approve the minutes from the Downtown Committee Work Group from November 29th, 2021. I will entertain either a motion or any changes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Oppose? Any abstentions this evening? And item is approved. Our next item this evening is to approve the minutes of our EDA meeting from December 13th, 2021. I will entertain either a motion or any changes.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Any abstentions? Nope. And the minutes are approved. All right, our next item, just for clarity, we're gonna add, for timing and sequencing, we will add the MnDOT discussion as between items 9 and 10, just for sequencing. All right, with that, we'll move on to item 8, which is the Washington County CDA Business Needs Assessment Survey results. Dan, any intro before we turn over to Chris Sang?
Yeah, just President, members of the EDA. The reason why this is on the agenda for tonight is considering that we're doing work planning tonight, this topic is timely as we start to figure out our work plan for 22, and the fact that this survey was just completed and it does show some of the needs of the businesses within the county and within Forest Lake. So as we kind of start our planning process here tonight, this information that Chris has does help to sort of provide sort of an on-the-ground assessment of what businesses are needing, and if we can add, if you see anything that we can add to our work plan, we can look at adding that to the work plan. But that's kind of why the topic is on the agenda tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Very good. Chris?
Thank you, President Bain and members. Good evening and Happy New Year to everybody. I want to give a shout out to Nanette too. I don't see her here tonight, but she was kind enough to do this survey through SurveyMonkey to all of the 6 chambers that serve Washington County. We've established a coalition of chambers across the county, and all of them are working very closely together. And then that's a very important part of that, and just a huge thank you to her for doing this survey. But what we did is we asked each of the individual members of the chambers across the county, what are the needs right now? What are you seeing? Because things have changed dramatically since the pandemic started, and now that we're recovering, what are you seeing going forward as far as needs? And I'm going to just show you the top 5 needs and then talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to address those needs here within the county. The first one, I don't think it'll come to you as a surprise. Hiring and retaining talent was the #1 need. And we hear it all the time, over and over again. We can't find enough people to keep the business going the way we were pre-pandemic. And in some cases, businesses are even have to change their hours to meet the needs of the workforce that can make it to work and that is willing to work. So that one for sure is going to have to be at the top of our list going forward. And when we're planning to address the business needs in the county, that one definitely is going to take some time and a little bit of help from our partners to get our arms around what can we do to assist with hiring and retaining talent. The second one was marketing and social media in a changing economy. Of course, everything shifted online during the pandemic, and so a lot of the small businesses particularly had to buy the software in some cases and get their websites up to date, and started taking orders and stuff online, and that's just simply hadn't been the case as much as it is right now, and probably will be more going forward. Managing growth, we're finding out that there is, and I've mentioned it before, and I think Nanette's talked about it too, there's a segment of businesses here in the county that are growing and have experienced challenges related to growing. It's good to grow, but sometimes it brings a whole new set of challenges, including investing in inventory and not having working capital to hire another couple people if needed. And so managing that growth is something we're really going to want to focus on going forward. And it's primarily the second stage companies, not the startups or the smaller companies. We think that the Open to Business program does a really good job serving the smaller businesses, the entrepreneurs and the startups. This is those, I'd say 50 to 100 employee businesses that are maybe too big for Open to Business but still need some help. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what we're going to be doing next to help that segment the stage 2 companies here in the county. Finding new customers. Of course, that one is of interest to a lot of businesses, and we'll continue to look for opportunities through social media and other marketing platforms, digital platforms, to try to find ways to bring in new customers to the businesses whenever we can. And then managing workflow, I think that one goes a lot with managing growth, to make sure that the companies that are growing can digest their growth and manage that workflow. And so what we've started to do is started to talk with the cities and the CDA board and a little bit with the county about starting a new program in the county, and it's not, again, intended to compete with Open to Business or replace Open to Business. It's to take us to that next level, and we're calling it What's Next. And we don't really have a better name for it. What's Next sounds a little bit better than What's Your Problem, but what we really want to do is try to find a way to help those growing companies get across the starting line to get that next level of growth under their belt, whatever that looks like. And so we're going to start by looking at ARPA dollars perhaps, and using some ARPA dollars to get the funds out into the community. But we're really talking about, I wouldn't necessarily call it an economic gardening program, but in some of the counties in the metro area, they have an economic gardening program called CEO Next. The hard part about that, there's two hard parts. One is they can't get the CEOs to commit to doing this for 6 months at a time. So the recruitment is difficult, but then once the CEOs are part of this program, getting them to show up is difficult as well, because it's a pretty significant commitment. It's probably a 6-month or an 8-month program, and they're busy. They just don't have time to stop and take on something else. So we're looking at it in a way that it might be an a la carte or a menu-driven program where you can subscribe to the services that you want at no cost. The county and the CDA would front end the cost for these business owners, but to help them do a CEO to CEO connection, a networking opportunity. So for example, if Anderson Windows has figured out a way to retain and attract talent, we want to be able to share that with other CEOs across the county. And not from government to CEO, but from CEO to CEO, and we would coordinate those efforts and those discussions. And then also, finding ways to fund permanent working capital. If a company is ready to grow and is ready to take that next step, but just can't finance that growth or digest that growth, we want to find ways to fund that working capital so they can buy the inventory, hire the people, whatever it might be. And so we're looking at something along those lines as well through this What's Next program. And finally, of course, the hiring and the retaining of talent piece is going to be really important. I want to continue to work with the Career Launch Program at the Forest Lake School District, which is an amazing program in the county. That's one of the best I've seen so far in the county. And are there other opportunities like that with Stillwater or South Washington County Schools or the Oakdale School District, for example? And we want to be able to make those connections so that we're all talking about the same programs and the same language. And I think there's these silos, and we just have to break down these silos so that the schools are talking to the businesses and the businesses are talking to the workforce providers. And all the way up to secondary education, I just think I'm guilty of it myself, we operate in these silos but don't do a really good job talking to other folks outside of those silos about what's needed. And maybe the businesses and the educators aren't even talking the same language, but trying to get everybody on the same page so that we're all trying to figure out how to get students into the jobs that are going to be not only here today, but those that are coming for the next 10, 15, 20 years into the future. I think with that, I'll pause briefly. I've just kind of scratched the surface, but obviously there's going to be a little bit more work to be done on this, but just to get you starting to think about that next level of what we can do at the county level to help the cities and the businesses within those cities grow and continue to grow and be successful.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris or thoughts on either survey results or next steps that he outlined? I guess one of the questions I have is, how do you see, what can we do to help? What are you seeing other EDAs doing? How do we kind of support,
So
activities and?
So this is really at the ground level. We haven't really talked to, you're the first community this year that we're just starting this new program to hear this. So I'll bring this to the Economic Development Task Force or working group to bounce it around a little bit, to try to define it a little bit, and then to build that program around it. So at this point in time, we're not really looking for anything other than ideas and suggestions and input. And if it's something that you think will have value, please, that feedback would be really important for us to know going forward. The hope would be that if this is successful, we'd like to add this to our core services through the CDA and offer it at no additional cost for the cities. We don't want you to have to contribute to this. This is something that we think we can, through a collaborative effort with the chambers and the cities, provide to the businesses within the county. So just the feedback and thoughts and ideas that you might have would be really important. And then, of course, the recruiting. If you know of a CEO that's struggling with whatever topic it might be, we'd love to know how we can help them. And maybe there isn't a specific, maybe it's research and stuff like that. We haven't really formed those partnerships with the U of M yet, but there might be grad students, for example, that might be working on their master's degree, and maybe they're looking for an internship or something like that, or a project that they can work on to provide that research. So those are the types of feedbacks that would be really important as we develop this going forward.
To think about that top need for hiring and retaining talent, does the county have, information or employment level information that can be helpful to help inform of where there may be, if there are even pockets of under-tapped talent, or is there information that the county might have that can help kind of inform that?
President Payne, that's a really good question, and to be honest with you, we thought we did before the pandemic, but it's all changed dramatically.
Right.
As more people are working remotely now and not driving into Minneapolis and St. Paul, those pieces of information are harder to come across, and they're not accurate. We probably should be looking at some type of a labor force study, and maybe broken down by market within the county. We might have submarkets. Maybe Hugo Forest Lake is a submarket. Maybe Oakdale Woodbury is a submarket. Maybe Cottage Grove is a submarket. But I think that is certainly something that we should be talking about. And if there's interest in having that data available, I think there would be interest from the county to help provide that. We just don't have it right now. It's really important to get that, though.
And it's changed and continues to change, right? Yeah. Any other questions, Jenny? Go ahead.
Just some resource thought. There's Marilyn Carlson Nelson from Carlson Companies. She has a television show called Inside the Boardroom, where she interviews CEOs, and like she had the female CEO of Marvin Windows on to talk about how they're getting through shortage of what to do during downtimes to hang on to their employees. Maybe they've got some groundwork already done that you could utilize going forward, or even just the
Thank you.
contacting
That's great to know.
Carlson
Appreciate that.
So,
I'll look
just a
into that. I
thought.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the update, and keep us posted as either programs solidify or there's other partnership things we could be doing to kind of help support, because I think we all look at this list and it's relevant and not surprising feedback, and we're motivated to.
Yeah, thank you. And I
Provide as much
appreciate your
assistance as we can.
partnership as well. We certainly can't do this without the city as a partner. And our hope would be that we don't have businesses that are falling through the cracks, that need help, that are struggling in one area or another, that we just aren't meeting. We want to be able to meet their needs if we can, so thank you.
Is part of the problem we're not educating certain people in certain jobs? I mean, if you have a company that needs a machinist, for instance, are we lacking in that type of education where we don't have enough people in that particular field, for instance? Or electricians,
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be.
President Bain, Member Hesnick, that's a very good point, and that's, to me, one of the most important components that this career launch program through the Forest Lake School District is working on right now to match the needs for what the students are, and hopefully make some connections with what the students might be interested in exploring for a career. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, and the partnership between the city and the school and the employers is going to be a really important one going forward.
It sure seems like all this should be kind of intermeshed with that, so. Well, anyways,
Agree. All right, Dan, 2022 work plan update and transition to that discussion.
Sure, President, members of the EDA, here to talk about the 2022 work plan. This is an annual agenda item. We always bring this forward in the first part of the year to sort of set the course for what we're going to do in the next 12 months. Just to remind everybody, what is the work plan? It's not an exhaustive or exclusive list of projects, so this is not only what we're going to work on, or does not encompass all of the work of the EDA, but rather it's a list of priorities. This is sort of the, if somebody were to ask you, hey, what is the EDA working on? You can sort of give them this list and say, this is the project that we're working on. However, if something comes up that we can chase, we'll still work on that, if it's relevant. But for the most part, these are the priority projects for the EDA. In essence, it's more of a guiding document for EDA priorities. From a process standpoint, the way the work plan has been set up is that in even years, we establish both the goals and the deliverables. So we go through all the 7 goals, see if they're still current, and then go back through and look at the deliverables for the work plan. And then in odd years, we just do the deliverable update. So the goals stay the same in odd years. The deliverables get updated and changed if need be. Based that this is an even year, we would be up for both a goal and a deliverable update this year. However, as you're well aware, we do have some pretty major projects right now in the pipeline that are close to completion. And given the fact that we're close to those, I don't want to propose a 2-year work plan and all of a sudden have, in a few months, a lot more work come forward out of the downtown plan. So what's being recommended tonight or being proposed tonight would be a 6-month work plan prioritization. So working on it from a 6 months perspective. Again, we're close to finishing the downtown plan, and that is going to bring quite a few projects to both the EDA and council level to start the execution of, and don't want to really have that sort of hit an already full agenda plate with, a 2-year work plan. And then also, I'll provide an update on this a little bit later in the meeting, but we also are looking at hiring the community development director as well. So want to have that new hire have some input too as to where the work of the EDA goes. So kind of given those 2 variables, what's being proposed here is a 6-month work plan. The thought here would be get the prioritizations set, early in the year, and then we'll revisit in the summer of 22, probably in July, take a look at what we've done, what we're going to add to that list based on the downtown planning projects. And hopefully at that point, the community development director is on board as well, so it can provide input into the next, would be 18 months of the work plan at that point. So what's being proposed or being recommended is first, we would be to complete the downtown planning process. I did have quite a conversation with Bruce today, just sort of setting out what the next steps are going to be in the planning process. And we are very much right now in the calm before the storm. So a lot of work is going to be coming out of that planning process in the next 2 to 3 months. It's going to be, there's a lot sitting in the wings right now. So it may not seem like we're moving, that process along, but he was telling me he's got stuff that sort of, once we get these directives approved at the next community engagement session, this thing's going to take off like we're going off to the races basically. So a lot of work's going to be coming out of that. We are looking at getting that done and approved probably at the beginning of Q2. Originally, we're looking at Q1, end of Q1, but he just said sort of from a meeting standpoint, he said probably beginning of April was when that will be done. And as a result of that, we are going to be seeing a lot of projects that are going to come to before the EDA and council as a result of that. Second thing to prioritize would be to start work on a policy review of our tax abatement, business subsidy, and TIF programs. anytime a developer comes into the city, the first question they ask is, what do you have for incentive programs? You know, and I think it's important to start to do some of the deep dives on these processes or these policies outside of a project. Take a look at how do we want to utilize TIF within the city? What sections do we want to, there's certain, like take multifamily, for instance. Do we want to incentivize multifamily with TIF all over the city in certain sections of the city? Just to start having those conversations as to what that looks like outside of projects. So when a developer comes in, we can say, we've talked about TIF, here's our guidelines for TIF use within the city, and then the same thing with a business subsidy and tax abatements. So we can at least, with some assurance then, from a staff's perspective, tell the developers that these policies have been reviewed by EDA and council, and if they're fitting these parameters, that there has been some, pre-flighting, or there's been some conversations that these would meet the incentive goals of the council and EDA. And the third thing would be to continue to support the efforts of the Minnesota Technology Corridor by actively marketing the Headwaters 123 as a premier site within the corridor. So those are the three kind of main work plan items. But like I said, it's not all that the EDA will work on. For instance, just talked to Chris today, getting signed up to speak at the May 12th East Metro Developer Summit again to sort of promote Forest Lake. So there are going to be opportunities to work on other items that are on the work plan, but this right now is being recommended as the kind of the priority list for the next 6 months. And right now, I'm just looking for feedback on those proposed topics and just sort of thoughts in general on the 6-month work plan. With that, I'll turn it back to the EDA for discussion and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dan. Thoughts from EDA on proposed work plan? It sounds like kind of a hyper focus here for the next 6 months on those 3 topics primarily.
Is that something the council works on and presents to us, or we work on together? How does that,
Which,
the planning, the tax abatement, business subsidy, and TIF programs?
actually, that's a good question. How do you see that? What do you see that process looking like, Dan?
And I look back at how it was done before. It sort of started in EDA. They kind of went through and did a lot of, like, I would say, the really granular level detail and review of it. But then it also went through council as well, sort of as it got kicked up and they reviewed it as well, since obviously they're the ones that would approve an incentive package. So both bodies were involved on it, but I think primarily a lot of that work was done at the EDA level to sort of take a look at what does the subsidy process look like? What does that program look like? And the same thing with TIF and tax abatements.
Do you feel like if you kind of take kind of a look at our existing TIF projects or projects that have been recently done, do you feel like there's a pretty good framework there, or that we kind of package and say this is the standard Forest Lake plan, or are those existing projects just such an a la carte hodgepodge, very project specific, that if we're looking for a cohesive, non-project specific policy, are we looking at something that's more starting with a clean slate? Like, I just don't have a good sense on where we are.
My 2 cents on it is that it's been sort of a hodgepodge, project by project specific, so we've sort of shoehorned TIF into a lot of different projects that have come forward. Like if somebody were to ask me, like, what's your standard TIF project here in the city? It's sort of like, have we used it for multifamily? Yes. Have we used it for new business? Yes. I mean, so it's sort of been all over the map, and I think at least with what's being proposed here is sort of some level of clean slate, but some level of like, here's the parameters. Like if you look at other cities, they sort of have, if your project meets some of these criteria, the developer has some assurance in that they know that they probably will qualify for TIF within the city or for an incentive package here. But we've been, I would say, pretty hodgepodge or pretty piecemeal in terms of very project specific at this point, historically.
So then the goal of this would be, rather than us starting with a blank sheet and saying chicken and egg to the developer, why don't you propose something? We're saying, here's generally where we've, a list of criteria where we would entertain, or.
That's correct. And what we'll start out with is the high level. Try to make you decide where you want to have, for example, in TIF apply. If somebody's building an apartment building, do you want to use TIF funds? Well, probably not, right? It's not really a good use, but if somebody's building something like a lighthouse lofts where there's retail on the bottom, that may be, so it's trying to define what projects qualify. We don't want everybody to come here and wants to build a subdivision or a apartment building or things like that to go for TIF, because that's just not a good use of TIF. But we want to try to define those parameters of projects that make sense. And like Dan said, it's been a hodgepodge, it's been very small TIF districts, where, for example, the downtown, we should maybe consider just one large one, so we have to work through some of those, and that's what we'd be asking you to do.
So that's in like a workshop form we would do, just because it seems
Yeah.
like it's obviously a big piece of,
Yeah, I think you would do it as a discussion, start as a discussion item at the EDA. We're doing something similar in the Plan Commission where we're talking about lot sizes for subdivisions. And so they're working through those parameters and whether they should change or not change. So they have a discussion item in each of their meetings to talk about that. And slowly they're forming where we should be going, and that would be the same thing. We'd start here, try to get the basis and try to get the outline done, and then send it to council, and then maybe have a joint workshop if necessary, or maybe just send it up for council to approval. It just depends on, the thoughts, and you have two council members here, so it just depends on the thoughts. But it would be either an ongoing or a workshop item throughout. It'll take a little time to do this. There's a lot of moving pieces to TIF and how you want to use it, or other incentives, even to talk more about than TIF, so.
Just to provide a little bit more context on that as well, I mean, we do have a business subsidy program or policy that's in place, but when it was passed hand in hand with the project that was coming into town at the same time. So we got to take a look at that. And I'm of the opinion where it's always better to look at these sort of without the pressures of a project, because when you write them with the pressures of a project, you tend to all of a sudden sort of get slated, or the glasses get sort of tinted with the fact that, oh, we need to make sure this project fits our current policy. So it's a good time right now to really review these when we don't have a big ask on the table, to sort of get this sort of overarching policy in place. And then from there, then when a developer comes in, you can sort of just give them the sheets and say, here's our policies that we have. And like I always tell developers, I said, the devil is always in the details of these things, where even though they may not qualify initially, we can always take a look to see, can we change the project to make it fit? And the project, there's some give and take. It's not just, the intent of this is not to tell developers no, it's to give them some assurances that they bring something that's close to this, that it has been reviewed. Both council and EDA are up to speed on what policies look like, and that we are trying to encourage development by having incentives on the table.
Go ahead.
I need educating on all those, so I hope you can forward something of, in the policy review to tell me, okay, since I haven't been on the EDA for approving anything like that, what a tax abatement, business subsidy, and TIF really mean, the programs and the impact on the city.
Yes.
So you've got something you can.
The intent of this would not be just, this would be like starting out with like the 101 introduction to TIF incentives, and then from there start to layer on and get more and more kind of,
Perfect.
Everybody up to speed on it, where it's not just you're dropped into the graduate level program discussing,
Great.
where to put these incentive packages within the city. So it'd be an education for both boards.
Thank you.
Kind of circling back on this question around incentives and TIF, any other kind of, is Dan's starting to think about what that looks like for the next 6 months or so? Any other specific requests we'd like to see? Sounds like there's a fair amount of consensus that there's appetite to have some more discussion, and at least trying to come up with a framework on what might be the Forest Lake standard, or at least a starting spot.
Well, I think with the downtown planning process, where it's at and where we're coming to, I think it would make sense to have these things in place, because there's going to be a need for investment and development. And so having these policies in place to kind of just coincide with that would make a lot of sense.
and I would just, I guess I would lean towards more being aggressive on this to start, because, if cities like White Bear and Stillwater are doing this, we need to be that much more aggressive. And so that's how I would go towards framing it initially, and that's my
Yeah, well, developers need to know what the playing field is like, so that this is all part of it, so this is it's a good plan.
So then circling back down, you had mentioned downtown planning process. Can you maybe go into a little bit more detail on next steps? I know the community engagement feedback has been held a little bit till we get on the other side of the new year, and now that we are in new year, did Bruce give you some thoughts on timing for, go ahead.
President, members of the EDA, I did speak with Bruce today on the downtown planning engagement side and wanted to get, a better tee up as to what the engagement and sort of just overall, what's the completion of the downtown planning gonna look like? And where we are right now is that the online portion will be ready to go on Wednesday of this week. I did see the drafts he was working on. I did see a draft of the website today, and what it is there's the 7 directives that we talked about at the last downtown committee meeting, and he has an introduction video that he recorded, so that anybody can come in cold and say, Directive 1, so he'll be there online in the video format, kind of explaining what Directive 1 is, and then there's a comment box that they can provide comments and say, yes, this is what we want to focus on, no, you're way off the mark. So he's got those for all 7. That's gonna go live this Wednesday, so he's gonna finalize everything today. I will get that integrated into the Invest in Forest Lake site, I'll get the links made tomorrow, make sure everything gets tested, and then we'll push that out live on Wednesday of this week. For the for the in-person engagement, we're looking at doing that on Tuesday, January 25th. We're gonna out of sequence the downtown committee meetings just slightly, for the next a couple meetings. Reason being is that he envisions the in-person engagement session to sort of mirror what was done when we first had the engagement session online or in person, where we had the big group in the community room upstairs. Looking for a little bit later in the evening so we can allow residents who work in the cities or can attend those at 7 o'clock versus a 5:30 start would be a little bit tough, we thought, for some of those people to attend. So right now we're looking at the 25th. The format would be pretty similar to the first in-person engagement session where community members are invited to come in and provide feedback on the directives. And then he's gonna take back the online engagement and the in-person engagement, sort of synthesize all that back up into a report, and then the first EDA meeting in February, so we're gonna flip-flop downtown committee and EDA meeting, because we don't wanna lose another month in terms of the planning side. He'll come back in on the 14th of February at that point, the downtown committee, and provide the update as to where the feedback that we got in the directives, and then once the directives are locked down, he's then gonna take it back and then look at the executables and the initiatives and sort of the really the lion's share of the planning stuff will come out of that feedback that's there. And then from there, then we'll have another review of what's there, and then it'll go back through for approval. So in talking to him today, he said once we get through the next 2 weeks, and February 14th, he's like, it will be off to the races. There's gonna be a lot of stuff coming out from the planning standpoint. So the in-person, the 25th, and then the follow-up meeting will be on the 14th, is what we talked about. And the reason we did the 25th is that there wasn't any other city meeting scheduled that night. It's on a Tuesday. Realizing it's sort of an out-of-sequence meeting, but we didn't want to compete with other city meetings that were there. If that doesn't work, if there's a lot of conflict with the different boards, there's some flexibility there as well, if need be. But that's the date we sort of penciled in for the in-person session.
January 25th, and then is it February 14th?
February 14th,
Okay.
which is the
I
standards.
love you all, but it is Valentine's Day, and you may all not love us as much. You may prefer to be somewhere else.
I think
Just
that
a
there
thought.
actually was a scheduled council EDA meeting that night, so we're already scheduled to be here, so we just,
Oh, we are.
so. I know, I thought that too when I saw the 14th.
I'll be working.
You are occupied for sure. It is a
is.
standard
It's
council meeting
standard.
night.
Yeah, so I
It
took
is
the next,
second. and we-
available EDA meeting and turned it into a downtown plan.
Well, bring your Valentine.
I think my wife probably wants to attend that, but I can ask her if she wants to.
Okay.
So we had, and maybe this isn't the right time to bring this up, so as a group, we've not discussed what we were presented, I don't think, when we last met with Bruce, and just curious to see if there's some feedback on maybe where we feel the direction is, if we think it's the right direction. I know Mark had a lot of good, valid points and questions, and apparently they were going to, he and Bruce were gonna meet, and I don't know if that's happened or not, and so I'm just kind of curious what maybe people's thoughts are on where we're at. I don't know if this is the right time
Yeah,
to
no, I
go
think
through that
this
or
is a-
not.
I think
but-
it's a good time for it, because we've got time tonight, so.
And just so the EDA is aware, there was a follow-up meeting that Mark requested, that it was held. We were hoping to hold it in person, but we had to hold it virtually. So he did go through and provide that direct feedback back to Bruce on his thoughts on the plan, and Bruce did take some notes regarding what Mark was commenting on.
So then we're not gonna see those changes before it's thrown out to
So that's what's included in the updated draft, and I don't know if I have that available here.
the. You said the onsite or the online engagement is gonna be ready on Wednesday?
Correct. And again, so he's looking for online engagement in terms of the direction. So there's still, we're not locked down in the directives at this point. You know, we're still, from his standpoint, there's the 7 directives that he presented at the last downtown planning meeting. If you recall those 7, like, I'll see if I can find the materials there. But we're not locked into those. So he's collecting feedback from both the EDA standpoint as well as the residents. Are we in alignment with where we want to go? And if he feels that, you know, if the residents feel and the EDA feels that there's something that needs to be changed in there, now it's time he's collecting that feedback before he locks those down. So it's still malleable at this point. It's not locked down at this point.
Is that plan that's going to hit on Wednesday, has that changed substantially from what the EDA saw?
I believe there was some minor changes to it, you know, but for the most part, you know, I think, you know, I'm trying to recall, I think one of the changes was, like, Mark had suggested where that entrance park was on the south side of town, of adding the option of keeping that open for development. You know, I think he did soften some of those and incorporated some of those suggestions that the EDA and the feedback that the EDA provided during that last downtown planning session.
And just to align on process, the goal for this next round of community engagement is really to continue, we're still in the ideation phase, but it's really to give a visual of a potential plan. We saw the visual map, to continue to collect feedback to inform next steps, right? Like, we're still in somewhat the ideation stage, would you say, Dan?
Absolutely, yeah, we're not in the spot right now where he's taking his 7 downtown directives and, you know, the feedback booth is closed. I mean, HKGI is still very much in the fact of making sure that what's presented on those 7 plans is in alignment with, you know, not only the EDA, but also the residents that want to provide feedback on the plan. And if there are changes and suggestions, that's what this round of feedback is there for.
The big question is, how is that gonna get communicated well enough throughout the community so that we really get?
That's a great, so much like we did the first rounds, I mean, we did a lot to push through social media. I mean, and I know there's a digital aspect and there's people that aren't on the digital platforms. Word of mouth is the other side of it. We'll put it in the city's newsletter, city's website. Talking to people, if you're saying, you know, on the 25th, come back in for an in-person or go online. You know, surprisingly enough, when I went through the first rounds and looked at the engagement that we had on that first sort of, when we were really high level, the engagement was far exceeded what I originally thought was going to happen for a downtown planning session.
And you felt like we got a broad perspective?
I do, I feel that we got a fairly decent cross-section, more so than, you know, it's not just the same small group that's always, we did have, especially at the in-person one, there was people there that typically don't attend in-person meetings, so I feel that we did provide or hit a good cross-section of the residents during that first round of engagement.
Yeah, and the online engagement that starts Wednesday, do you know how long that window will be open?
I believe, I mean, if it runs consecutive like to what they did last time, my assumption will be that it'll stay open until he sort of really formalizes his, you know, where his, the next steps are gonna be, which I guess would be probably 2 to 3 weeks, you know, and you know, engagement tends to sort of spike at certain times, and then once it starts to trail off and there's nobody there, I think at that point they'll close it. I didn't confirm end date with HKGI this afternoon when I was talking to him. It was more just sort of, we talked kind of high level next steps in the process.
So this January 25th meeting, I'm out of town. Can I Zoom it and participate by chat?
we will try to get an online session again. We did it for the first one, and that was sort of, it seemed to work, and I'll propose that again to HKGI, see if they can't do another online. Because there are going to be people who don't want to necessarily participate in person, but still want to provide feedback during that, kind of the presentation side. So I'll see if they can add additional Zoom session for that meeting as well.
Okay, so then how do we access that to join it? You'll send something, well, there,
There'll be, like last time the link was promoted on the city's website, then you just signed into the webinar, and then they had somebody there that was managing it and letting people in. And one of their staff actually ran that meeting during the meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great, 'cause I'll be out of town as well.
I think maybe embedded in Blake's question and maybe making sure that we've got enough time is, so we have these sessions, I'll speak a little closer to my mic. So we had a session, the last working session. In that session, we're intaking a lot of information, and you as the staff and Bruce are getting our initial reactions, but it's really our undigested initial reaction, right? And then we haven't had time as a group to kind of come back and rediscuss, and so I think that would be important to work into these next steps, is yes, let's have that community engagement session, let's have that big group discussion, but let's also have some EDA working time so that we're able to at least gauge where the 7 of us are we on the same page, are we not on the same page? Just what is our thoughts after a couple of weeks of thinking about it? Because just speaking for myself, I will think of my next best idea 2 days from now, and I'm sure you all do the same, right? So.
And I think to that point, President Bain, I think after the in-person session on the 25th, that's the intent of the 14th, is sort of to say, here's, HKGI's ideas with some initial EDA feedback that we can sort of tweak those a little bit. And here's what the community thinks of those ideas. Now do we want to change those to sort of bring that back in context of what the community thinks of those ideas as well through the in-person and online engagement session. So that session on the 14th is designed to really say, is number 1 in current state, is this good to go, or do we need to change it based on EDA feedback and community feedback?
So I've been just thinking a little bit about, this downtown plan and what do we need for this plan to, I think our goal is still to land on a plan that is ready for council approval sometime this summer, right? So.
Actually be beginning of quarter 2, so short window, but yes, correct.
Window.
Yep.
And so I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of information that's coming in, and there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen. And I think just facilitating through that, I think having a member of the EDA that is not myself to kind of be the chair of that downtown committee, I think we're at a spot where that's needed. And I mentioned specifically pulling myself out of that seat because so can president of the EDA, and I can sit as the mayor's seat, but also being the person to kind of coordinate all those ideas and making sure that we're hitting the right timing, I think is another role that we should consider having somebody else lead that charge. Because again, it's somebody who's making sure that the EDA is coming to consensus, that council's coming to consensus, and also that it is mirroring what our community wants. And all of that kind of starting to come together in a pretty short amount of time, and working with staff to make sure that we're, the right people, the right information, that we're kind of keeping these pieces together. I think that's a pretty big job that I think me sitting in multiple roles is probably not the most effective. Open to feedback, but that's just something I've thought about as how do we land this thing by, even if it runs a little later than we want, by June, it really is just around the corner, and there's a lot of details to synthesize between now and then. Now that I've teed it up so complicated, maybe nobody wants the job, but I do think we should at least be asking the question of what's the right, is in the right spot to be in that role to bring all of that together. Again, I'll say, I think personally, my goal is that we land on a plan that has broad consensus. I think if we land on a plan that's got a 4-3 vote behind it, or a 2-3 council vote, that's not what we're looking for here. And so that person's got to be able to kind of pull different ideas together and then work through with staff, so we've got a process that supports that. so.
Just a poor moment of clarity too, in terms of the timeline on this. You know, I don't want to make it sound like all of a sudden, you know, we're on a roller coaster at the top of the hill, and the next 3 months, we're just gonna be boom, and we have a plan, and nobody, you know, all of a sudden, it's like, how do we get here? You know, if we need to add another feedback meeting after that, I know Bruce is gonna be open to that, you know, because he wants to make sure that the plan that we get, the plan that's adopted, is the plan that we want and the plan that we paid for. So I think, you know, we do sort of control the brakes and the accelerator in terms of plan approval here, but you're right, there's a lot of work that's gonna be coming out of this. You know, it's sort of, you know, I was telling Bruce today, it's sort of like we're at mile 20 of a marathon. You know, we're sort of in that spot right now, where we're sort of questioning, are we ever gonna finish this? And it's 6 miles, and it may seem like a long ways away, but we are gonna end up getting to that finish line. We just need to make sure that we get there in the best condition and get the best plan that we can get as a result of it.
The other thing because we're a public body, the EDA is a public body that is limited by quorum limitations and open meeting law limitations. That's a little bit different if we get out into the members of the community and the broader downtown group. And then also, I would say somebody on the EDA who's not in a council position that can also be having some conversations with council members, just to make sure that they are also coming along, is another reason why I think that should, I'll put Sam in it should not be Sam and I in that role. But I think should be a member of the EDA, so.
Mayor
Open to
Bain,
thoughts.
quick question, you see this role being something to just help us get across the finish line of an approved plan, or carrying it on into Q3, 4, and
I think it
beyond
would be
to
permanent. I think it should be
implementation?
I think it should be permanent.
I think it's beyond, because I personally, I think this becomes, so this is, we're gonna approve a plan, but then the EDA is going to continue to take that work to the next steps. And we haven't defined who that group is necessarily, but there's certainly going to be work that needs to be done, and I think there's there's an ongoing role there. It may or may not be the same person, but I do think that, having that relationship with the community and the business members, and it's somewhat EDA, but it's very hyper-focused on downtown, that it could be an ongoing role, especially if we found that this group of the downtown committee members that are outside of the EDA, if they continue to meet and there continues to be a work plan, then somebody to chair that as well. Because one of the items to come out is, somewhat of City of Forest Lake project list, and kind of taking that list and work planning that is, there's some crossover with EDA, but there's some other things that will be, working with Planning Commission on certain items, or whatever that looks like.
And to that point as well, I mean, I think, given the amount of effort that's been done to date to get the plan to where it is, the worst thing that can happen is that we get the plan approved and we're like, well, that was a great 18 months, let's stick it on the shelf, and what's next? I mean, we need to move into that implementation phase to make sure that those projects that are outlined, we start working on those in some way, shape, or form, so we can start showing progress on those, because,
And I absolutely agree with that, and I think that is the fear of this group,
Yes.
and the fear of anybody I talk to in the community, another consultant group. So we need to be very hyper-focused on making sure that doesn't happen.
And I agree, and I think one of the attributes we should be looking for in whoever's going to lead this next phase should be some level of diplomacy to be able to recognize, timeout, this actually the undercurrent of the EDA, or undercurrent of council, or the undercurrent of the community. We're not ready to support these elements, and so as those conflicts are gonna come up, so as they come up, what needs to happen so that we do get a plan that all 7 of us can nod and say, yes, we support, we're proud of, council has that same level of buy-in. Because the community's gonna have questions. There will be parts of the plan that not everyone's gonna understand, but you need those champions that say, well, actually, here's why the plan looks like this, and can tell that story, so.
So I know I asked this question before, but when does the price tag get tagged on? Because that's the first question everybody's gonna be asking.
so, and I've asked that question multiple times as I'm trying to work on budgets for upcoming years. It's really where he's at in terms of, it's gonna be specific to the projects that come out of, so from a sequencing standpoint, directives get locked down, so now he knows the direction that the plan needs to go. That sets the project list or the implementation list, and then from there, then you get the executables, and then you get the price tag on there. So for example, let's just say that the crosswalk going across 61 stays in the plan. That's something we want to pursue. He'll throw a rough number behind what that crosswalk would cost. say it's $10 million, and you can look at some point, then you have to figure out, if we fund it, how do you figure that into CIP, you know? So there will be a price list that comes out of that, but it's gonna be based on the project list, which comes out of the directive. So we're sitting at the
But
spot.
still down the road.
About 4 meetings away.
Yeah, it's down the road, but it's not, you know, it's right around the corner, basically, is a better way to look at it. It's just right on the corner for
And
that
so
list.
really, these open meetings are going to be, like, if money were not an object, what would you like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as like, he's been directed to some point to sort of plan outside of the context of budget, you know, which kind of puts him in that, you know, if you're designing from, given the current parameters of downtown, what can you design with? He's bringing that back, and then obviously, if he brings back a $2 billion plan, it's probably not gonna happen, you know? So I think there's the guardrails are still there somewhat. You know, HKGI has been doing downtown planning for years, so they sort of know, you know, what the appetite is for most communities. But obviously, within that, then you take the look at the full CIP list, and you start to prioritize. This is the priority that we wanna start with, here's where we wanna go, boom, 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 keep these ones in the wings. And also with that, if there's grant opportunities for grant matches, you have projects now that are more shovel-ready than we currently are. So a grant project comes forward, we can say, you know what, this fits in, this downtown plan for parking fits the parameters for this grant, we can apply for it. So.
You gotta
there's-
start out with a wish list.
Exactly.
You have to. And then find out what your budget.
And to recall back, that's one of the reasons why HKGI was selected, that was one of their kind of advantages, whether you do get a 20-year CIP as a result of that, that has some price tags on that. So not only you get the plan, but you get the pricing behind it versus just a plan, then you have to figure out what the pricing is after the fact.
Mayor Bay, I think you came up with a great idea of having someone quarterback this. What are the next steps to do that, put that in place?
So I think we should make that an official action of EDA. I think giving everyone, this group, just giving that some thought, think about who that might be, and bring it back to a future EDA meeting, I think makes sense. I'm interested in feedback on what else might we want out of that role, or what else others might be looking for. But I do think that whether we're talking about a plan that is ready for approval in April or something that's in June, either way, that's a fairly amount of kind of very specific work that's gonna happen here in the very short term that probably deserves somebody's kind of full-time quarterbacking attention. And also working with staff to just make sure that we've got people and resources connected. Ultimately, we have Bruce and his firm for this purpose, but I think what Bruce and his firm and what Dan can't do is to kind of gauge, kind of what's the Forest Lake flavor for this? Are we on the right path, or are there certain things where we're just, you know, we've missed the mark and we need to recalibrate? And I think that's where we would look for this leader to kind of help provide that feedback to Bruce and Dan so that we're able to get to the end result we want.
I think if, you know, what I'm here for the next EDA meeting, which would be, you know, again, like I said, we're sort of, for February, we're gonna resequence the meetings, so downtown committee will be first, EDA will be second, but I think we'll have a little bit better idea of, A, are we on the mark from a community standpoint, so I've gotten through the engagement sessions, and then B, we'll sort of, you know, I'll see if I can't get out of Bruce sort of what he anticipates some of that initial workload to be, so we can sort of frame it up a little bit better and take a look at, you know, what does it look like to sort of make that more of a, because the downtown committee sort of exists sort of as an ad hoc group of the EDA, but it's never been formalized, and start looking at, do we want to formalize that? What does that look like? You know, who's going to take ownership of the plan after it gets approved?
So next EDA meeting would be the second meeting in February.
Correct.
Is that February 21st is President's Day? Do we move to the 22nd?
I believe.
Either that Monday or Tuesday, though.
28th. 14th.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry. You're right. It is the 20th. I've got my weeks mixed up. So it would be the 28th.
Yeah, the 28th at 5:30.
So, you know, kind of going through these next two sessions will be downtown committee. One will be a community engagement. The second is kind of a working session of the EDA to kind of synthesize that information. And then we would be looking to name a chair February 28th, which really is a pretty short runway to drive this home. But I
Correct.
think that's also a good time to have somebody kind of specifically helping to see where there's gaps and helping to facilitate what needs to come together where, whatever that might be to bring that home.
And I think too, just from a timing standpoint, I mean, again, always bear in mind, if we feel that, you know, on the 14th, when we're sort of having that wrap-up session, if we feel that we may not got the engagement that we need, we can look at seeing if we can do another round or some other level of, you know, again, we want to make sure that as we go through this, that we feel confident that we've had, the residents and the boards have had enough opportunity to provide feedback on the plan, because the plan will drive what the projects are and what downtown will look like.
Does that sound okay? All right, and my one worry is we're essentially giving the community one set of deliverables to look at. And my concern is that where we might need to think about work plan and sequencing is if feedback came back that we needed to recalibrate something, I don't know. Use of the lake wasn't we didn't hit the mark. And that if we wanted to give another visual to the community, it would be that second round that we might need some time for.
Yeah, I mean, and again, to that point, if you need to make some tweaks to it, I mean, you know, I don't know if that's built into the original scope of having multiple rounds, but we can always add that or get that, you know, again, want to make sure the plan that gets approved, everybody's comfortable with getting that approved. And if that kind of backs the back end schedule at a couple weeks, it's worth the investment to make sure that the deliverable is what the EDA and council want.
Picture is just so valuable that it might take multiple rounds to get that all the way home. Any other points of feedback as we think about work plan again and kind of next steps for downtown? All right, great discussion.
So just on that, the third one, on the technical.
Tech corridor,
Yeah. corridor.
Headwaters Parkway.
So, and this is another thing that was presented that we haven't yet talked about, and I understand scheduling is tough, but when the gentleman was here to talk about, you know, another consultant to kind of help us through that, and I don't know, and maybe there was some opportunities to get some grant money from Washington County, and so I just wanted to update on that, I guess. And maybe this isn't the right time, maybe we can wait on that, but.
No, actually, I had it as part of my staff updates, so some of my staff updates are happening right now, which is totally fine. So I do have an update on the Excipio study. If you recall, it was Jeff Gilmer who was in here, and I believe it was October or November of last year, kind of presented, you know, what Excipio does. He called me in December and told me he's retiring and is no longer with Excipio. So he's now in Green, I think it's somewhere in South Carolina, riding bikes every day. So I'm a little bit envious of that. But he is transitioning our account to a new representative. And I believe the rep that we're getting transitioned to is one that would have done the work anyway. So I'm working right now to reconnect with that group at Excipio to sort of make sure that once the dust settles from Jeff's retirement, that we can get back on track, that we can get what they need from us and we get what they need, or we need from them. And then also, I'm still looking at also partnership funding for that to help drive down the local cost for that. So it's still in process. It's just that when Jeff called me in December, I thought he was gonna talk about the plan. He's like, oh, I'm retiring. And I was like, oh, congratulations. But I did receive over the weekend an email from the new reps. I'll reach out to him this week and reconnect there and get sort of an updated timeline on the Excipio study.
So, one of the takeaway on that, just that brief presentation, was that not having, you know, it sounded like one of the negatives to that site was not having two sources of like power. And so I don't know how you get around that, if there's opportunities there, but that seemed to be kind of a big piece of what he said. The one thing that our site was lacking.
Correct. It was two sources of data. So
Okay.
he said you have multiple
Yeah,
data
okay, that's
providers in the trench on 61. He goes, you have them, you know, you have multiples there. He's like, unfortunately, what they want is one coming from one trench, one coming from another one. And it sounds like there are opportunities adjacent to 35 that they could get over, but he wasn't quite sure what that looks like. So he's basically was just saying, when Jeff looked at it sort of 20,000-foot viewpoint, he said the data providers was probably one of the, you know, he wasn't quite sure if that was the poison pill or not for tech center development there. But he's pretty confident they would be able to pull something in from 35. And he asked me that, I said, I don't know, we've never actually had that conversation. So that's part of the reasons for the Excipio study. And it also, when we talked to him initially about proposing the Excipio study was, wanted a stopgap in there where if all of a sudden he does that initial research and says, you know what, we can't get two sources of fiber here, we could stop the project and not have to pay the full amount, because at that point, you know, tech development from a data center standpoint probably wasn't gonna happen. So that's why that stopgap was in there, but it is on the list for him to review early on in the process to see if we can't get that second data line into the property.
I think that's important that we get to that point where we know, because that's a valuable piece of land, there's a lot of demand for it. If we need to move on from a tech center, then we just.
Great. Great. Good points. Any other questions or thoughts around the work plan? All right, let's move on to our added agenda item and talk a little bit about Highway 61. Blake, you want to maybe tee up, and I know maybe Ryan has some perspectives and.
So, you know, we've talked a little bit about this over the years, and an incident that happened in late October when MnDOT came through and put this product down that, well, first they shut all the access points to this businesses without any notice at all. Ryan reached out to Ryan right away, and he had no indication of that happening. So there's that, you know, the light pole that was hit last winter hasn't been replaced. It just, I think that we just don't have the control that we need, and I know we've all talked about this, and this is a pretty big proposition to go through, but, you know, and just conversations I've had with Ryan about the downtown situation, and that what comes out of that plan is we need to have a little more say there. Otherwise, whatever Bruce comes back with, if we can't do it based on MnDOT, then we're in a tough spot. So I think, I understand that, you know, this can happen down the road, but like, do we have, and Ryan, maybe you can fill us in, but like conversations with the county, is the county interested? And if not, then do we need to decide whether or not the city wants to take that, and does that turn back have to go all the way to the county line? So is it all of 61 through Hugo and get Hugo involved? So those are just some questions that I had, and I really think that we need, this is a huge piece of this whole downtown thing and everything. We need to be in front of that and try to get that conversation going. I know it's some initial conversations had, but just maybe an update on that and where that might.
So you want me to kind of just address what a turnback might look like and what that process might be? What we're talking about.
That, and if there has been any discussions with.
Yep. So I think what Blake's bringing up to you guys is basically who is the road authority ultimately has control of that roadway and what happens within that right of way, right? So like us, the city on our local roadways, we're the road authority, so we can control what we build or maintain within those road authorities, just like MnDOT does in the county. Starting back to the day that Blake was talking about, now obviously we've been on MnDOT for several years now on why isn't Highway 61 in your CIP? We respectfully disagree with your findings. Could you please have maintenance crew guys go out there so they can continue to look at it? And then the day of that, some maintenance crews guys became available is when they were coming to do some scope of work that they thought, but it ballooned into what they had to do. So you got a better Band-Aid, but again, MnDOT openly said we dropped the ball, we didn't communicate between the maintenance to their engineering and then to the city. So hindsight, you can't do anything about that, but MnDOT obviously says they got caught with their stuff down, right? Because the issues on 61 were much greater than they originally thought. So even once they started going at it, when they found out that the issues were bigger and the operation was gonna have to expand instead of multi-days, they started bringing other resources over from other areas of MnDOT to deal with what they were doing, which was a microsurfacing finish. You gotta lay it down and basically you can drive on it after several hours once it cures out, and then that's what it is. So with all this, you know, there's still conversation on, you know, stuff we want incorporated in MnDOT CIP, and then there's been a lot of talk with the county. Now, MnDOT would love to just hand that road away right now, but there's a bunch of implications behind that and mileage that you need to maintain throughout the system to get your state aid funds. You know, even if we start dumping road miles off to somebody else, say, if we could, we reduce the number of miles we have in the community, which is then gonna reduce your state funding that you get, okay? So there's that whole formula. So With that, typically when there's a turnback, there's a substantial investment made by the two parties that are probably involved. Ideally, it would be MnDOT and the county on how they would come to an agreement like the city did with the county and Washington County. In hindsight, I don't think we had the best deal, but when there was a turnback of 11th Avenue Southwest, County Roads, County State Aid Highway 32 and North Shore Trail, there was a large sum of money that came to the city that funded the local share of the roundabouts and the downtown, or Broadway portion of the projects. A lot of people don't know how all that Fast forward, Washington County's engineering, public works staff went through a lot of staffing challenges over this last year. They've lost some project managers that have relocated to other places, and they promoted some other staff within, and they dealt with a lot of retirees. They got all staffed up now, and they're moving forward, and it's in their CIP. That's gonna start a planning study of Highway 61 corridor. And it originally was just gonna start with Hugo, but the counties requested that to be expanded to include all the way up to the Forest Lake County border. So the county will lead, RFPs will probably be coming out within a few months for this study. That's gonna include all the way through Hugo and up through Forest Lake on the Highway 61 corridor, and talking about access. Just all the things that are gonna go along with road authority decisions, access, and obviously, we want more access, they want less, like even the downtown area, when we're trying to do some of the beautification things and the pots, we had to go through a pretty strenuous permit on just the location of where these pots would be located, for clear zone and stuff like that, so. It'll be very favorable to see what the county's study evolves out of this, as, the county's obviously less restrictive than MnDOT. And if you can make that first transition, long term, that'll be a benefit for everybody, so. But then there's hindsight, then if the county takes that, there's other roads that are coming Forest Lakes way. The same with Hugo's gonna have the same situation too. If I could fast forward and had to guess right now, I think someday the city's gonna own County Road 50. Why does the county want it? I just see that happening someday.
I should know that.
By Hawthorne Heights.
Oh, yeah.
And all the way to Snakes, all the way out that way. So that's some of the things that happen, as these turnbacks happen. MnDOT wants to just be on the freeways. And it's even gotten to the point, MnDOT doesn't want to have enough staff to even lead their own projects now. They'd rather have consultants lead their projects on their own road authority, and they just sit back and do the review. Less staff, less resources to manage, but then if they can localize just to a freeway system, and they can be more efficient and streamlined than having to deal with a downtown district situation and all the public engagement that kind of goes with those projects versus a freeway, and working your way down. So that's where we're at. If we took the road over and reconstructed it right now, just shooting off my hip right now from where we stopped at the roundabout to 2nd Avenue by the bank, I'm guessing just for streets and pedestrian facilities and stormwater, we're probably $5.5 to $6 million project, and doesn't include any sewer or water, or property acquisition, or burying any overhead, or, the property acquisition easements and stuff if you might need it. So it's big chunk of money if the city did take that over right now. Obviously, that's several years of our street budget. We have 130 miles of roadway. That's slightly just under 1.5 miles. 4-lane section carries approximately 22,000 cars a day at its busiest points. As we get closer up in here, we're about 19,000. And then once we get past 11th Avenue, we're about 16,000 cars a day.
So with the counties are gonna do the study, do you have a timeline on when, or a thought on when the study concludes and when they might have some?
No, just because they're finally got staffed up. I even talked to a new project manager that's been assigned to County State Aid Highway 32 project. The new one that we're gonna be releasing some RFPs here shortly, and they want to get engineering going on this one. And then he's also the same person that's taken over County State Aid Highway 33 Everetson Avenue project.
Okay.
So going into final plans and specs. So they got those two staffed up now, and then they also have some other staff that can deal with this study and lead the study between the city of Hugo and Forest Lake.
clarification whether Hugo would they like that as well? I
They
mean,
would love this. This is one of the reasons why it evolved, and it was only gonna, it was MnDOT and Hugo talking. Then we got involved, and the county got involved, and that's where the county has requested that study be expanded to include the Forest Lake area too.
Is there, do you expect that that study will include some level of public engagement from Forest Lake? Yeah, okay,
County, I mean, just on one typical project, you can see how well they
They're
did
great.
the public engagement portion.
yeah.
That really was my reason. And then is it odd that, and this is simple things, but that a year before they would replace a wooden pole that was knocked out in a traffic accident, like,
Where's this wood pole at? Is it at a signal?
it's 11th and 61. Yeah.
If it's on that signal, the only reason I can think of why they didn't bring something brand new in is because they know it's gonna get reconstructed, part of the County 32 project. And maybe when did it happen?
Last.
So they already started with 33, because at one point, we didn't know if we were gonna do Everton Avenue or 11th Avenue first. But the city requested that we do Everton Avenue first, just so we could deal with the Menard situation.
And so when would that be? That's scheduled.
33 is construction 24, and 11th Avenue is construction 26.
Which to us is a light year away, and this is part of the challenge, is that the timelines are just so long that, yeah. It's hard to project out, yeah. Well, I expect that this topic is gonna continue to come up as we think about downtown planning. It's great to have the update, and it's great to see that thank you, Washington County, for kind of expanding that scope of study to include, from Hugo up to Forest Lake, and that, I think there'll be valuable information. I will just, just for the EDA's information, council's working through what this 10-year financial plan looks like, and Ryan talks about, the effect of the last major turnback, which was the turnback of North Shore Trail to the city, and that's still today in our 10-year financial plan. The rebuild of North Shore Trail is not a funded project that sits in that 10-year financial plan. It's an identified need that, I don't think anybody feels comfortable saying that we're done with the plan and that it just won't happen in 10 years, because I think people have a general sense that it needs some action, but finding the funding to support a project of that scope is challenging, and so that's kind of the downstream impact on these turnbacks, is it needs to fit into our long-term plan, because once we do turnback, it's ours, and it's challenging, so. But also, the topics are also important, and it is our downtown, and the aesthetics are ours, and so, we need to manage our role in that very carefully, because it's got long-term ramifications.
So, when we do review site development along 61, we look back at the Trunk Highway 61 aesthetics and water quality plan. We try to guide the site improvements to follow that, but, there's been a lot of flexibility granted away from that, just because of the costs that would be involved in that too, so that's also the wedge in the fight that, goes back and forth. Is the city being too strict? And, the developer wants to do less, but we're like, this is the plan. So there's some other situations that have had redevelopment along here that you don't see the trail constructed along their property, even though that was in our plan.
Right.
Because that was forgiven. I mean, right out here is an example.
Exactly right.
This whole chunk right here, So if you're familiar with the Trunk Highway 61 water quality plan, it has a 10-foot trail all the way up, to 11th Avenue, so. But, you talk about the TIF stuff, that's just the stuff that all happens in the background, right? You're trying to make a project move forward for economic development, but then if you want to implement all the stuff that goes within it and don't have shared funding, something gives, whether the project goes away or they don't build it without some of that stuff. So it's not fun. That's not the fun part of our job at all. You're trying to implement what the vision was. was, and sometimes decisions are overturned on what you're trying to require.
Other questions on this topic or thoughts? Sounds like there's some solid next steps happening, which is great. Ryan, keep us updated as you hear timelines, would be good.
They really just announced it, was it Thursday? We had every quarter, Washington County holds a meeting with every city engineer in Washington County, and we talk about everything in the county. So that's where they announced it, that they've got things coming together and they'll be releasing an RFP shortly, so. To get a consultant on board to help with the process.
Excellent. Other city updates, Dan, you mentioned we had talked through much of your updates. Anything else, Patrick or Dan?
No, just, we did mention the community development director will be reposting that either this week or early next week, and we'll actually be going on a national search. We kind of did Minnesota the last time, but we'll put it out to the American Planning Association and try to get a better pool than we had last time.
And just on the open to business side, I did talk to Tyler, who's going to be resuming in-person office hours here at the city center. He used to pre-pandemic be here 2 Tuesdays a month, and I think he's now looking at coming back 1 Tuesday a month, so he will be resuming in-office hours here at the city center to help those who want to utilize his services. I don't exactly know when that's going to start, but that is on the horizon.
Fabulous. Any questions for Patrick or Dan? All right, Washington County. Chris, anything else?
President Bain, just briefly, I wanted to just mention that in 2021, the CDA celebrated our 40-year anniversary. And so you may be getting a copy of this 40-year anniversary report. And in that report, and thank you, Dan, for helping me put this together, we did a case study of the downtown study that the EDA and Forest Lake is working on. So you'll see a nice picture of the downtown in that report if you have a copy of it. And it was a very nice written report.
Copies of those are on the dais, or I forgot to mention that, so thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but those
That's
are
all
on the
I have.
dais.
Excellent, thank you. Anything for Chris? All right, and we don't have Nan here from the chamber. Jenny, anything for the
She
chamber?
texted me to represent her. Good news is we have 2 new businesses that will be coming into Forest Lake in the coming month.
And who are they? Fabulous.
She didn't give me the names or the locations, so that's what she gave me.
Excellent. All right, with that, we've covered our planned agenda this evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.